Hi, I'm Mark Elrich, the County Executive of Montgomery County, welcoming you to the Maryland Association of Counties Conduit Street Podcast, the show that discusses the issues and ideas shaping Maryland policy and politics today.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally here with my co-host for today, Karrington Anderson. And today we're diving into an important and growing trend among our counties, inclusive recreation and play. Karrington, tell us more about what we're going to be doing today and our special guest.
Awesome. And thanks, Kevin. Today is actually my first appearance on the podcast as well. So fingers crossed, not the last, but I am excited and think it'll be a memorable episode. We do have a special guest joining us today, Jill Moore, Inclusive Play Specialist at Landscape Structures. Jill, happy to have you on the podcast today.
Oh my God, I love being a special guest. Thank you.
Yeah, Jill, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background and what Sparks at Play does? Because we've heard that name, we've seen it at the conferences, we know it's good work, but tell us a little bit more about the background and exactly what Sparks at Play does.
Yeah, for sure. So my role specifically with the company, I am our inclusive play specialist. I work for Landscape Structures. And in my role, I have a disability myself. I'm a full-time wheelchair user. And so my role is really connecting disability authentically with what we do, be it how we design, how do we think about design, how do we create, how do we educate. And Sparks, we're so lucky to work with these guys. They're just an awesome crew. They are sales representatives based in the the Maryland and Virginia area. And so they, really do some awesome work with connecting, just if we have communities who do want to enter this space of creating inclusion and doing inclusion more intentionally. These guys are really just awesome people to work with in connecting resources and making inclusion happen and figuring out what people need and what that's going to look like.
Yeah, you have an incredible story, Jill. And with your background in mind, can you first explain what inclusive play means, just so everyone has the correct understanding, and then share why it's important for communities?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think inclusive play, it varies per community. It varies per person of what inclusion means, what it looks like, who it considers. And I think that's a really beautiful thing, is that it's this ever-changing, ever-moving thing that we just want to keep learning and doing better. But to me, for designing for inclusion, I think when I think about that, I don't believe inclusive play is designing for people with disabilities. I think inclusive play is designing for everyone, right? That we want to create a space that everybody can come to, everybody can use, everybody can bring their vitality. I think inclusive play is that line in the sand. It's being welcoming, it's celebrating abilities, it just is a way to design so that every single person who comes into this space can succeed. They can feel invited, they can feel welcome.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that the definition is always evolving. And I know that I visited some really great inclusive playgrounds in Maryland. Our counties are trying to make sure that that's, at the forefront, is making sure that inclusion is at the top of a lot of different things. And that includes playgrounds and in play. So can you share a little bit more about how Sparks at Play helps local governments in Maryland and why counties should prioritize inclusive playgrounds and recreational spaces in their parks and in their recreation planning generally?
Oh man, okay, yeah. So Spark's role is, if we have a community who says, you know what, I want to build an inclusive playground, or I want to build a playground in general, anywhere in Maryland or Virginia, Sparks can come in and they can really assist with that process. It's taking a look at what resources need to be gathered, of what does the site look like, who needs to be involved, who are key players. How do we build community awareness? So Sparks can jump in and help with community meetings and pulling people in to have these conversations on, all right, what is play going to look like for our community and how do we create that? So Sparks connects us as the manufacturers, to connects us with getting designs and getting products. If they feel that, okay, the community wants to create an inclusive space, but we don't know what all that entails, Sparks connects continued education. So they're going to be the ones to bring in people who can lead seminars and education on what some of this stuff looks like. But really, they're just kind of a top to bottom person or group of people who are going to work with the community to get the product, get the install, get the resources that need to come together to make this playground happen. And they can connect too of us who have grant guides, who have experience working with communities all across the country, all across the world, to see what we've seen in other places that have been successful and how we can use that to not have to recreate the real wheel and still create successful play. So Sparks is just like it's the Swiss Army knife, really, of if you want an inclusive project, they're going to be able to connect you with everything from the playground itself to site furnishings, to kind of everything in between. And then I guess the second part of that is why should Maryland continue to prioritize inclusive play and recreational spaces? I think when we prioritize inclusion, I think what's really special about that is we're saying that we value everyone, that we truly believe everybody who's coming to this space has something to offer, and that we really value what that is. And so I think when we prioritize that, it ends up being that we're saying we value everybody in our community. We really believe everybody has a lot of vitality, a lot to add. And so that ends up being a really strategic thing, right? I mean, communities want to be known as a thriving place to be. They want to be known as livable. They want that educated workforce, that sustainable tax base. And the way to do that is to say that we prioritize everybody being able to participate meaningfully. And then when we do get that right, when we have thought about inclusion, when we invite everybody to engage with these spaces, wherever their abilities may be, it's just, I think, a really impactful way of a community coming in and saying, you know what, we want that. We want what everybody has to add.
I love that. I think, in hearing that, I have two small kids, and, we go to the playground a lot. We go to a lot of different playgrounds. And I think so much of, their life is they're learning so much at the playground, right? And they're seeing different things and they're socializing. And I think when you prioritize inclusivity, I think that sets a tone right there for their entire life, right? Like, we care about making sure everyone can play and everyone can have fun. And so to me, that just stood out in terms of what you said. And I feel like doing this and promoting inclusivity at the playground level really sets the tone for kids throughout their life. And so that really resonated with me, what you just said. And it stands out because I think starting at the playground, starting when kids are small and teaching them the importance of making sure that everybody has access and everyone can play and everyone has, the equipment that they need to have fun and recreate, that makes a ton of sense to me.
For sure. And right. And we also think about, when we talk about inclusion, we recognize that it is this thing that's in motion, right? That I got schooled the other day by a teenage girl. And the only way that like teenage girls can decimate any amount of confidence you've ever had. I was chit-chatting with her, and I used the term special needs, and she kind of came back to me and said, why are your needs special? And like, bear in mind, she's a disability as well. She wasn't just like calling me out. Right. But while we were having this chat, I was like, you know what? That's actually a really cool point, because every single one of us has our own unique set of needs, right? And our own unique set of abilities, and those are ever changing. And so to design for inclusion, we're designing for that flux, right? Even if you go to a space where you bring your kids to the playground and one has a ton of energy that day and one doesn't, right? And so they still want to have a good time. They still want to be able to engage with the space. So maybe while one goes and takes on the tough climbers, another one goes and sits on a swing or something that's going to be a little quieter or meet their needs where they're at. And I think that's kind of what's cool about inclusion as well, is it's so much bigger than a lot of the times people say inclusion and they think it's that one kid in the wheelchair. But to design a successful inclusive space means that I can go there as the kid in the wheelchair, and you can go there with your family, and every single one of us is going to be able to gravitate towards something and engage meaningfully.
That's a really good point. And you kind of touched on the design elements a little bit that enhance accessibility for children with physical disabilities. Can you touch a little bit on the developmental disabilities as well, and maybe some design elements there?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know how deep into the weeds you want to get, but when we think about development, healthy development, we know kids want to build social skills, cognitive, physical, and sensory. All of those are kind of aspects that are really tied into a playground. And in disability, it looks like different things. Like, right, if you may have a child who enters this space who has ADHD or something to that effect, they might have a breakdown in their motor planning process. So meaning if I stick them in a playground where all it is really, really, really complicated net climbers, While some kids might really thrive with this and love the challenge, love that sensory input, that proprioceptive input they're getting from climbing, you might have other children who maybe their developmental skills, maybe their motor skills just aren't there. And so for them, the playground would be really, really overwhelming. It would probably cause them to get really, really frustrated. So instead, if we think about the design, so say this was a design that all it was just really complicated net climbers. If you started putting in different layers of complexity, so maybe a really, really easy climber, maybe something, this belted material we see on playgrounds now. It's a rubber belt, basically. It's about half an inch thick, however wide it needs to be. But that can be installed at a slope that's really comfortable for a kid who's crawling or scooting, or maybe just getting a little steady on their feet because they haven't developed to take on those complex climbers yet. So varying routes of complexity that meets for just wherever a child may be in their skill level, in their motor planning, things that encourage kids to sit face to face and connect and have social play. I have seen for a while, I've seen a couple pieces of equipment in the industry where the wheelchair accessible seat or the inclusive seat, quote unquote, is facing away from everybody else. So meaning while everyone else is getting to hang out with each other, stare, laugh, and have a good time, I'd be sitting in the seat facing out like one of those old station wagons.
That makes no sense. Yeah.
Right. It's goofy. And so it's little things like that in a design that you think about. Inclusion is connection, and inclusion is meaningful connection. And so having a seat that faces inward for kids to build those communication skills, or we think a lot about we talk about regulation. And so regulation is huge when it comes to designing for developmental disabilities, designing for any ability, really. But our ability to regulate is our nervous system's way of keeping calm, right? For example, I have a friend who really, really, really hates flying. And so when she goes and flies, she has this like 12-step ritual, like got to chew 3 pieces of gum, got to bring my headphones, got to have my neck pillow, all these things that keep her nervous system calm when she's in this space that causes her to get dysregulated. And we look at that with kids, of maybe the playground's a little bit too loud, or maybe they get too hot, or maybe it's a child with a sensory disability who, if they have the wrong tag on the back of their shirt, to them, that registers as painful instead of just something that might be a little bit annoying. So all of these factors can come in and cause us to get dysregulated in a space. And we think about disability, that's where we get that idea of a runner, right? We have a kid who gets dysregulated. They hit that fight or flight state and they want to get out of there, and they're not necessarily waiting on their caretaker. So we want to include design supports like different sensory experiences, climbing, spinning, swinging. All of those are sensory, to give us sensory feedback that might calm a child back down. And we never necessarily know what that's going to be. But that's why we want that variety.
And Jill, I like that you shared that story about the swing. I think it's just a really good perspective, and I'm sure one that resonates with many kids. And I think really is something that most of us haven't thought a lot about, and it's just something that we all need to think of more. So I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, to your point there, and that's what I think is so interesting about being in this space. I love when people bring something to me. I'm like, oh, that has never occurred to me. Like, for example, we had a mom reach out to us and said, like, hey, like, my daughter doesn't have any depth perception. So her visual disability is she truly, I mean, she sees a stair, and if that stair doesn't have the right color contrast, she has no idea how high that stair is. So adding different colors and textures and sounds into a space, we've learned a lot about having a visual disability. What does that need to be? I mean, what are things that we can do, other senses we can leverage to still make a space comfortable for a child to get around? And all of that, again, like just what you said, stems from abilities that aren't our own, entering this space and saying, this is what I need to be supported, and to have a rock star day at the playground. And us and Sparks and anybody who's really working in this space, taking that information and understanding how we can dissect it, how we can leverage it, and how we can learn from just the people who are living it.
Yeah, I love that. And you have to be there, right? You have to go to these playgrounds. You have to sit there and watch how kids interact, how they play, and you have to talk to people. And I think that's so important. And that kind of leads me into something I wanted to get into a little bit from your perspective. We all know the the evils of social media, right? There are countless problems with social media, but one thing that I can imagine is that, I feel like parents with kids with disabilities maybe sometimes feel isolated, maybe oftentimes feel isolated. And prior to social media and prior to, social communities online, I can imagine that that was really hard to find a group of people who were motivated to go and ask local government to do something with the playground to make a more inclusive playground. But with the advent of social media, do you find that it makes it a lot easier for people to connect and realize that, hey, I didn't realize that in my own town or in my own city or wherever in my county, there are so many people that need the same thing and they just didn't know how to engage. They didn't have anyone to kind of lead them along. And now we're all connected. Do you feel like there's a huge correlation in terms of the advancements we've seen with inclusive playgrounds over the past few years and however many years, and the advent of social media and people just being able to connect with one another and realize that, hey, there are communities out here and we can all organize and go fight for what we need, which are more inclusive playgrounds?
I think for sure. I mean, I think to that question too, I mean, any inclusive playground or product, anything that goes in, I'm going to butcher this metaphor, but what is it? A rising tide is good for all ships kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think with social media and parents being able to connect, one of the biggest things I see a lot of the time is people enter this space and all they want to do is be heard, that they haven't had a space to go with their kid. And that's challenging, right? To feel that you haven't been designed for or thought of. And so I think with the rise of social media, you get to see projects that have happened in other places in different ways. I mean, you got to be able to answer for big to small, right? If not every community is going to have this massive budget to do inclusion, but you get these people who approach the park and rec entities and say like, hey, we need something. And you can't deny that, right? I mean, they do. They need a place for them and their families to go. And so being able to show those different iterations of how it's been done, who did it, where they found funding, it tends to be a really good rallying cry. Like, for example, there is a class here. It's an elementary school where a fifth grade class, a singular fifth grade class, identified that they had a lot of students in their school with disabilities. And that singular fifth grade class, they decided they were going to raise money. They wanted to buy a just tried and true standard old wheelchair swing. So they were working hard at that. They were raising money for that. And then they found themselves so successful in this, and social media helping them take off, and CBS interviewed them, and this, that, and the other. And so this one fifth grade class has raised over $1 million for their own school's playground. And I mean, it's crazy, right? They raised this money for their school to have a new playground, and then they formed a nonprofit. All of them went to 6th and 7th grade by this point. But they formed a nonprofit to create or to continue raising money so that they can build more inclusive playgrounds in the school district. And a really big part. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's a fantastic story. And again, it kind of goes back to my point about when we're designing playgrounds that welcome all children, we're building communities where inclusion is the norm and not the exception, right? And these kids going out and raising money and continuing in those efforts, I mean, that's got to be a good thing for society and civilization generally, right? Like teaching young kids the importance of that is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, creating like fierce little advocates. I met a little girl once who her sister was in a wheelchair, and they were at the playground together. And the playground had been a really sore spot for their family for a while because she would go to school and nobody would play with her at recess. And it's not that people didn't want to play with her. It's just because the environment wasn't inclusive, she wasn't able to play. I was chatting with her sister about this, and we were at an inclusive playground finally. And her little sister just looked at me and said, somebody made fun of my sister the other day. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, what'd you do? And she said, we were at the playground. I told him not to make fun of her. And I said, well, what'd he do? And she said, he did it again. So I punched him in the eyeball. So just like you said, when inclusion is the norm, though, I mean, you're creating this fierce little advocate to see disability and are curious about disability, but still ultimately they want to welcome disability and learn about it, and generally are pretty adaptive. But as long as the environment is set to be correct, as long as I'm going to be able to succeed, they're going to be able to succeed, that there's something there for all of us. Yeah,
that's so good. And I just think people really connect with these types of stories and want to give you the opportunity. I don't know if there are any other stories that you'd want to just share that are just success stories, maybe from one of the other projects that you've been a part of where inclusive play has just transformed a community.
Yeah. Oh goodness, there's a ton of them. I mean, from that like micro level of just bringing people into folds, and macro of seeing these projects come to be. But one that really stood out to me was this mom contacted us, and like you said again, that power of social media. She had seen other communities throughout Minnesota. Landscape Structures is based in Minnesota, and so this mom had seen all of these communities building inclusive playgrounds. So she called us, wondering why they hadn't done one in their community. And so with that, I mean, we sat down with her and we explained that we're the manufacturer. We're doing as much as we can to make people understand that importance of inclusion. But I think what was really powerful about connecting with her and this family is we invited them to come and test products with us. And that was a pretty incredible development. I mean, because her son has SMA, so muscular atrophy. He's kind of a floppy kid, but he joined our team. And I mean, watching him and his mom interact with product, we learned that we want so much more of that. There's a movement in the disability world right now called Nothing About Us Without Us. And that's to say, we cannot design for disabled individuals without bringing them into the process. So getting connected with Dash and his mom, I mean, they've become lifelong friends, right? Of people coming in who we said, you know what, we hear your frustration. We want to learn from you. And that's been so valuable. I mean, you're never going to get feedback like that unless you've got a family who's living it. So I think they were a really cool one. Let's see. In North Charleston, South Carolina, these guys embarked on building the largest inclusive playground in the world, kind of zooming out and going to that macro level. And I mean, they created this amazing space. It's multi-generational, it's inclusive. They've got an inclusive baseball field there. They've got walking and accessible bike trails. They've got this giant inclusive playground that's fenced and shaded and every design detail in between. And they've got this beautiful community center. So they really went in and they did it all. But what's been cool about it is just how they've integrated inclusion into every little detail. Like, for example, they have a company that for their vending machines, they send over a group of people with different disabilities. And so you have some of these people who really love that social aspect and want to connect with people while they're restocking the vending machine, and others where like their jam is organizing this thing and making sure everything is like nice and neat and ready to go. And so they're employing people with disabilities, they're inviting people with disabilities, they've top to bottom thought of everything somebody might need. They have accessible standards in their classroom, so if a kid needs to practice getting that muscular just standing and building those muscles up while they color or cut construction paper, that's been considered. So it's really cool. It's called Park Circle. It's in North Charleston. That's a really cool one to just learn some of the, even every detail I get from them is just awesome.
I have to look that up. That is amazing. And just really kind of, again, putting into practice what Kevin mentioned about just it being the norm rather than the exception. That's really good.
Yeah, that does sound amazing. And I want to get into a little bit. I mean, we've talked about the rosy parts and then some of the challenges, right, with going down this path. And I think, not that anyone would say it's not important, but I think what stands out to me are two things. Number one, cost. And number two, when you want to embark on this journey, and you talked about North Charleston and every little detail, it seems to me that it may be overwhelming to try and make sure that you have every person at the table, that you're representing every kind of disability or any issue that someone may run into when they're going to a playground. And so how do you prioritize, and how do you get over that fear that you're leaving someone out, that you don't have everyone at the table? And I know that's important. I like the Nothing About Us Without Us, but it seems to me that you could really go down a rabbit hole and trying to make sure that you're checking every single box, and you could almost get weighed down by doing that. So how do you address, number one, cost, and number two, how do you prioritize what exactly you need, especially if cost is a concern? How do you make sure that you're representing as much as you can on a limited budget, and where do you kind of draw that line and feel comfortable with it?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to answer two first, just because I think it's a little more of an in-depth question. Obviously, we want to support as many people as possible, but when we open our arms to truly doing that, I mean, that does get overwhelming, because you could have people telling you they need 10 million different things to be supported. And so some of the ways I've seen this done successfully, and I think what's special too about where we're at with inclusion, not every playground can be the mecca of inclusion, right? I mean, just based on budget, we can't answer for every single thing at every single park. And somewhere I've seen that's really, really successful that I've just really encouraged people to look to and dive deep in. So Anchorage, Alaska in 2006, they identified that their park system needed to be made more inclusive, which first off, that's really cool in itself. Like it wasn't even a law that a playground had to be ADA compliant at the time.
Right.
That didn't happen until 2010. So inclusive park systems were pretty new when this was being discussed. But what they went and did was they created, and they have this all online. It's meant to be replicated. So I always encourage people to look up Anchorage, Alaska, inclusive play, state of play, something like that. It's any combo of those words, I think will get you there. But what they did was they gave every park, they mapped out every park in their system, and they gave every single park a score. And so level 4 meant it wasn't compliant at all. It was just falling apart. First thing that needed to be prioritized to be changed. Whereas it went all the way up to level 1, where a level 1 inclusion was there's correct surfacing, there's different sensory experiences, there's accessible parking or an accessible restroom, or all of these things that they mapped out of, okay, this is a level 1, this is inclusive. And what they did was they laid all of those out in their park system. They figured out what was where were the most level 4s, where do we need to prioritize changing one of those, bringing it to a level 2 or 1. And they also give it a spatial analysis score. So how connected is it to transit? Is it near park, nature and wildlife? What kind of vulnerable populations are nearby? And so that way they were able to really fine tune every playground in the park. They were able to really, or playground in their park system, they were able to fine tune what does it have? Who does it support? Where is it at with things? And that ended up being really, really impactful because they could really map out and see what needed to be where. Say, for example, a park with fencing, right? That's going to support those kiddos who are runners. So if that family feels safe that their kid can go and play without running off. But not every park is going to be able to have fencing, but they were still able to identify near you which one can you go to, which one's going to answer for your needs. So they really have strategically spread out inclusion to where each park answers for something different. And finally, I think like last year, maybe the year prior, they finally got enough grant money to do a big project that was going to be the big Mecca destination inclusive park. So it can happen over time. I mean, it can be something that develops.
I like that. And into the cost part of this, and it's something I wanted to ask you too. I mean, first of all, you said 2010 was when, playgrounds had to be ADA compliant, and that is bananas to me that it took so long. And I understand
Isn't that crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, I get it that there are costs, and I understand all of that, but just the fact that it took that long is insane. Second, it seems to me that there should be more federal grant money available, right? State and federal level. What are you seeing in terms of grant opportunities? Do you see that spigot kind of opening up in terms of more money being available and having to teach people how to go and get it?
I think from my narrow perspective, yes, because I typically do a lot of the education. So some of this, I'm not really connecting with groups and going out and seeking the grants, but I do know, I mean, with the passing of the Land Water Conservation Fund, I believe that was back in 2020. That opened up a lot of money made available for people's outdoor space projects. And then, I mean, grant guides, looking at what grants are happening when and where. I think people are getting a little bit more intentional and savvy about how they pursue these things. And I think I love to see people get creative in the grant space. I know one group who applied for a grant that was actually meant to be helping people revamp their homes to make a home more conducive for disability and life as a person with a disability. And they went for this grant, and they made the point that there are stairs on their playgrounds. And so people have to have practice going up and down stairs to be able to successfully do that in their home. So people who kind of find this way to like connect the dots and get really creative about it, I think I'm seeing an uptick in that. Yeah, and in general, I think I am working with quite a few more communities who've gotten grant work or know what they need to do to apply for a grant or need specific information. So from my narrow window of view in that regard, I think it is really growing.
Yeah, I think that is really helpful to know. And I know counties it's always helpful for them to hear about different grant opportunities just because there's different counties have different resources and it's just not a one size fits all and different communities have different needs. So it's helpful to hear about some of the challenges that you have highlighted. And building on that, I'd kind of love to turn the conversation to hear your thoughts on the future of inclusive recreation and kind of hear what trends you are seeing emerging in the field of inclusive play and recreation and how they might shape the future of parks and playgrounds.
Ooh, good question. Yeah, I mean, I think to Kevin's point earlier, just like, and as you have repeated, inclusion, making it the norm, I think that's going to really sculpt a lot of different things. Because, I mean, that's exposing people to disability. It's exposing people to know that I, as a disabled person, still have a lot to add. That I think the power of inclusion, right, is that we're celebrating all of these different people and welcoming me and saying that I'm valued in this space. And so I think with inclusion becoming the norm, it's really going to shift how people interact with disability. We're going to see it as a vital player. We're going to see it that I'm all those wonderful things about me, that I'm competitive, that I think I have a cool personality, that I love to joke around, that I've got this fierce imagination. If the playground hadn't been designed for inclusion, you're not going to see that about me. You're just going to see my disabling condition. And so as it becomes the norm and as more inclusive playgrounds continue to just develop and rapidly be created across the United States, across the world, it shifts how we interact with disability and how we see disability. And so I think from that micro level and those conversations and relationships being formed simply because the environment is welcoming us, I think that's going to be a continued shift that just completely shakes my experience as a person with a disability as I grow up. But I also think in the field, I don't know, as we just continue to learn, right, and learn what different disabilities are. I mean, this all started at looking in 1990, we got the Americans with Disability Act. In 2000, guidelines for children are created for the children's play space. And in 2010, those ADA guidelines became law. But we haven't necessarily touched those laws on the playground specifically. So it ends up relying on some really outdated information. But that ADA law at first, it was just focused on physical disabilities. But as we get better at this, as we learn more about this, there's a massive surge in, okay, how do we design for autism? That's a pretty prolific diagnosis. And now it's conversations like, all right, how do we think about ADHD? How do we think about motor coordination disabilities? Kiddos who are deaf or hard of hearing or blind, low vision. It's saying, you know what, we want this melting pot. We want any and everybody to inform us on how to create and how to make this better. And so that's, I think, a really big trend is just continuing to open the doors, right, to different needs that haven't been supported, and learning what makes for a great day for them and what can we do to build on that.
I love that. And I mean, again, I think that, people fear what they don't understand. And to me, inclusive playgrounds teach kids from a young age that diversity is something to be embraced and not feared. And then, like you said, for kids with disabilities, I mean, having access to inclusive playgrounds has to be life-changing. I mean, it's a place where they can be themselves and make friends and feel like they're part of the group. And so I love hearing all of that. And, the federal government and ADA, not until 2010, we know that we can't rely on the Fed. They don't do much at the federal level, right? Or it takes a long time. So we know typically where you can make change at the state and particularly the local level. So on that note, I mean, I guess an opportunity for you to talk about your work and your folks a little bit more here, but what can counties do to stay ahead of the curve? I mean, how can counties make sure that they are checking all these boxes, that they're making sure they're hearing from the right people, that the right people are in the room? How do they make sure that they can stay ahead of the curve with all the things we've just talked about and how important this is? Give us the pitch in terms of what you all can do to help and what counties can do generally just to make sure that they are up to date and they're doing the right thing for inclusivity and making sure that kids have access.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the best things they can do is you really got to arm yourself with education and the right team. And so, I mean, I think that's what's so special about working with Sparks and working with landscape structures is it really comes down to who you're working with and what kind of quality they provide, what kind of expert resources they have on their team. I mean, for example, and not to toot my own horn, but if you have an inclusive project that comes up, Sparks is able to connect to me, and we are able to connect with occupational therapists. We're able to connect with color experts. We're able to pull all these voices in. That we have people who, my whole job is inclusive playgrounds, right? It's taking all of those success stories, taking all of those disabilities, everything that I've learned, and using that lens to look at a playground. And we have people who, I mean, have their own level of specificity of what they really do. And we are an email away from Sparks at any given time. And so that's what it matters who's on your team, of who's going to support you. I mean, Sparks is an outstanding job too, of just customer support and things like maintenance, for example. I mean, who do you want to call if you built this awesome playground? You want a team by your side that's going to be around to help you maintain it and keep it awesome and fresh and wonderful for years. So I think being really intentional about who you pull into the project, working with people who are connected to everything you could possibly want or need or want to be educated on within this process. And I think another really big part is to stay educated about it. I mean, to seek out continued education courses, seek out knowledge of what are people doing that, like Anchorage, Alaska. You want to be connected and on the pulse and going to big conferences to hear these success stories, to hear how people are doing this so that you can take that information and bring it back to your community. And then otherwise, I mean, you mentioned, and we kind of touched on this before, of pulling the right people into your team, learning your disability resources nearby, I think is or being able to connect with people who can help you be educated. But are there services nearby for specific diagnoses? Like Shriners hospitals. If there's a Shriner hospital, they typically treat complex orthopedic disabilities. And so if you're building a playground and it happens to be near Shriners, that might be where you want to prioritize so that physical access. But knowing those disability resources in your area is going to help you drive what do you need, what's the top priority to fix, where should we delegate money, what kind of disabilities are we seeing that we really need to answer for in these designs. Bringing in your occupational therapists and physical therapists and designers and connecting with community meetings and saying, hey, these are our choices, everybody select what they like best. That way you're still getting that input from the community, but you have a little bit more control on what you do with that input. So connecting to the key players, connecting to the community, understanding who you're working with, having that connection to expert resources, all of that, I think, makes for a community that can successfully do inclusion time after time. Is a long answer long.
No, I love that. I think that nails it on the head, right? And again, I think the most important thing is talking to people and, going out and meeting people where they are. And when you're making these decisions, making sure that you have all the right people in the room. And, like you said, if you're near a Shriners or you're near a hospital treating that kind, complex disabilities, whatever it is, you can get kids to actually test the equipment, come out to the playground and see if it works. And I think that's super important. We don't need people who think they know without the people in the room who actually know designing these kind of projects. So I love that. And I've learned a lot today, Jill, and I really appreciate your time. Is there anything that you want to close with that maybe we haven't gotten into before we let you go? Because again, I wish we could talk about this all day because I think there are so many different things we could jump into, but anything that you want to leave our listeners with before we let you go?
Oh man, sage wisdom on the fly. No, I think we just want to, again, really hammer down on that idea of inclusion is for everyone. I mean, because sometimes if we're going to put an inclusive playground in our community, a lot of people think, well, why am I spending more money or time or energy or effort on this thing? My family doesn't have anyone with a disability, so
right.
why should I care about this playground? And I think making sure that people understand that this is something for everybody, that this is designing a space that your family who may not have a connection to disability can still have this awesome time and still feel the joy and the power of an inclusive space. But at the same time, another family who has kids with disability, there's connected with disability, that they can go and have that awesome experience as well. So I always want to make sure, when people know that when we say inclusion is everyone. It's not just for me. It's not just the disabled users. It's truly everybody to have an awesome, equitable experience in an impactful space. So I think that's my final soapbox.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think too, it has to be curious, ask questions, and be willing to learn more too. So I think that's great.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, we don't make progress without asking questions. So the willingness to learn and do better and make strides is huge.
I love that. And I think that's a great place to leave it. Jill, we really, really appreciate your time today and your insights on the importance of inclusivity and the work that you're doing. And we hope to have you back soon to hear about more progress, but we're going to leave it there for today. If you enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe. That way, all of these episodes will be sent directly to the device of your choice. You can also follow along on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and then, of course, you should always be reading the Conduit Street blog. But for Jill and for Karrington, this is Kevin signing off, and we will talk to you soon.